Tonight, President Trump talking again about the Russia probe and Robert Mueller, and for some reason, his election performance as well. A former federal prosecutor joins us to separate fact from fiction and what matters from what doesn't. Then an inside look at the latest from Capitol Hill and the White House with that man, ABC News political director Rick Klein. And later, prosecutors have offered Patriots owner Robert Kraft a plea deal in his criminal case for patronizing a prostitute. Will there be a deal or no deal? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in once again for Richard French. President Trump spent most of this day in Ohio, but before he left Washington, he railed once again against the Mueller report.
No collusion. I have no idea when it's going to be released. It's interesting that a man gets appointed by a deputy, he writes a report. Never figured that one out. Man gets appointed by a deputy, he writes a report. I had the greatest electoral victory, one of them, the history of our country. Tremendous success, tens of millions of voters, and now somebody's going to write a report who never got a vote. So we'll see what the report says. Let's see if it's fair. I have no idea when it's going to be released.
When the president wasn't talking about his election results, he was referring to Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general. By the way, Rosenstein says he's sticking around a bit longer than he originally planned. He was supposed to leave about now, but he's postponed that. Smart Money is betting that he's staying to shepherd through the end of the Mueller probe and the subsequent release of Robert Mueller's reports. The president was also asked whether the public has a right to see that report. Here's his response.
I don't mind. I mean, frankly, I told the House, if you want, let them see it. Again, I say, a deputy, because of the fact that the Attorney General didn't have the courage to do it himself, a deputy that's appointed appoints another man to write a report.
And joining us now, former federal prosecutor Andrew Cherkasky. Andrew, let's begin with the president's comments today. Your reaction to what sure sounded like his call for all of Mueller's findings to be sent to Congress and released to the public, but also his rather bizarre comments about Mueller's report coming out of nowhere or that Mueller wasn't elected.
Well, Mr. Trump has certainly gone back and forth on his position as to whether this should be made public or whether it should remain as a private matter. Now he's saying it should be made public. I think that demonstrates at least a certain confidence in Mr. Trump that he thinks that this report is going to acquit him or show that he hasn't done anything wrong. He may be making a good strategy move in doing that, at least for publicity purposes. At the end of the day, though, we still don't know what Mr. Mueller has found. Mr. Mueller has an open investigation, and that's recently been seen in those search warrants that we finally saw from Mr. Cohen's search that took place, going all the way back to 2017.
Will what Trump said today impact what Attorney General William Barr does with the Mueller report? And as an aside, would it be appropriate for Trump and Barr to discuss it behind closed doors, whether to release it?
I think Mr. Trump knows at this point that any of those closed-door meetings are going to come out at some point and are going to be made to look like it was some sort of collusion or some sort of inappropriate conduct on his part. So I don't think that there's going to be any direct conversation. Now, whether the president has the right to talk to one of his executive branch members about what he wants to do, that's a little bit of a tougher call. In this case, with regard to the release of the report, I do not think that Mr. Barr is going to be seeking Mr. Trump's input on that, and I think that Mr. Barr is going to be doing what he believes the law requires him to do in that regard.
Let's talk some more about Robert Mueller. In responding to a Washington Post request to unseal some of the records in the Manafort case, the Mueller team asked for a delay until April 1st, citing, quote, the press of other work and the need for more time to consult within the government. That's got everybody speculating about other shoes that Mueller might drop. I'm curious, what do we know from that response, from what Mueller tells us, and then speculate what else it might mean?
Sure. Well, it's certainly something that could mean something salacious, but realistically, as an attorney, what we know it means is that attorneys are busy. When you have a pile of work on your desk, going down that row of work that has to get done, you have to prioritize one thing after the other. I ask for extensions all the time for courts to give me a couple extra days here or there because I've got another motion or another filing that's due. So that's what we know. Speculating It could mean any number of things. It could mean that they're working on a new round of indictments. It could mean that they're working on the report itself, and that's about to drop. It could mean that they're short-manned at the moment, and they've just got pressing work to do. I would think that it probably means they've got something that's hot, something more like new indictments, something that they have pressing.
You know, we seem to wind up speculating about Mueller's timeline and his future just about every night here. Should Mueller give the American people an update on his timeline? Of course, it's not required, but given all the attention, do you think he should?
It is something that I think the American public wants some degree of insight on. The problem is federal investigations tend to be very secretive, especially when there's many people involved, and especially when those people have a history, or at least the belief that they may obstruct justice by either talking to each other or trying to destroy documents, something of that sort. So federal investigators, and my clients deal with this all the time, they take their time. They're secretive about what they're doing, and they don't have a good track record of giving updates, so to speak, as to when things are going to close out.
Andrew, as you know, several House committees have requested documents on a variety of topics and of the White House, and we're being told that they are stonewalling. The White House doesn't seem to want to cooperate. Should we read intent there, that they're hiding bad stuff, or would that be sort of a pro forma response? And also, what would be the White House's end game here, to try to force the House to issue subpoenas that they can fight in court, maybe take it to the Supreme Court?
Right now, what we have is a purely political issue, in my opinion. The House has asked for the production of documents. Now, historically, many presidents, even from opposing parties, have complied with those requests with few exceptions. Now, what we find ourselves at today is this point where Mr. Trump has effectively communicated an intent not to cooperate with the Democratic-led House. He doesn't necessarily have to right now. He's not violating laws in doing so. There are legal avenues that Congress can take to try to force the White House to produce those documents, but that's probably going to end up with our third branch of government getting involved as to whether or not Congress is overstepping its bounds.
In your mind, if you were representing those committees, how risky would that be? What would your advice be to those committees that are doing the investigation? And is there anything short of issuing subpoenas that Congress can and should do?
Well, I think if I'm advising Congress at the moment, I think that the advice is probably more along the lines of we are still in a political arena. We aren't necessarily in that legal arena because we still don't have that report of Mueller. I think that the Democrats really need to wait and see if Mueller provides some sort of information that would be impeachment worthy. If something comes out impeachment worthy, I think that's what Congress really needs to focus in on in the full court press with regard to subpoenas and all legal avenues. There are not particularly strong avenues for Congress to take right now without the issuance of subpoenas and the threat of additional legal action to force the White House to produce these tens of thousands of pages of records that they want.
And finally, Andrew, the administration has been losing in court, in federal court, about a 6% success rate of fending off challenges to its rule changes. And the article in the Washington Post said that most are self-inflicted, that the administration needs to defend any changes that it wants to pitch with facts and evidence, and that they just don't. One expert said they're not doing their homework. What's your takeaway from that?
The president has taken a very bold position from the time that he was running through the time that he's been president, that he's going to take these bold and outrageous actions, that he's going to do more in a more shiny, flashy way than any president has in the past. And obviously, it has resulted in many lawsuits. Now, he has lost quite a few of those lawsuits. He's also won, or the courts have kind of split the baby from the bathwater where they're allowing certain parts or forcing him to twist around some of the actions that he's taken. I think that overall, in assessing these losses, I think what it's communicating is that there are tremendous safeguards that are in existence, both in the judiciary as well as through the citizens of our country, to be able to sue and to be able to stop actions that cross certain lines. It is going to continue to be a frustration for the president.
All fair points, but if the White House simply isn't providing the facts or the evidence that they're supposed to in these cases, I mean, that doesn't seem like it's just relying on public opinion. I don't understand why you would prep something and not follow those rules if those rules keep getting it kicked out of court. Can you find an explanation?
think it's difficult to do, especially if you don't have the right people. I mean, a lot of these rule changes or policy changes, these are the results of years and years of federal employees who have worked on these for decades and know every intricacy of what's going on in those regulations. When Mr. Trump came in and started to place in his cabinet and then even in the lower levels, but still high up in the food chain, these individuals who have no history with essentially the regulatory purposes or the regulatory processes of the executive branch, they start to make errors. And that's where I think things really go wrong, is you try to make big steps when in actuality it requires quite a bit of history and quite a bit of knowledge of people who are institutionalized.
Andrew Cherkasky is a former federal prosecutor. Andrew, appreciate the insight and a few minutes.
Thank you so much.
Up next, multiple investigations now underway following the crash of two Boeing 737 MAX jets in just a 5-month span. Right now, there are still more questions than answers, and lots of those questions are aimed at the Trump administration and the president himself. ABC News political director Rick Klein joins us to talk about that and more next.